The Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Kenneth Matambo, had shared the proposed policies and strategies for implementation this year, as well as the corresponding resource allocations, as aligned to the 11th National Development Plan, or NDP 11 priorities. He shared these against the backdrop of renewed positive sentiment regarding global economic growth, following from a decade of subdued growth across the globe since the global economic recession. And pointed out that the recovery in the global economy is expected to have a major impact on the performance of the domestic economy this year, as it provides a market for our exports, with positive growth rates of 5.3% expected in 2018, up from 4.7% in 2017. Exactly a week ago, First National Bank of Botswana convened thought leaders, experts and members of industry to review the 2018 national budget, as has become custom for the past 24 years. FNB fear that growth may be below trend and average 3.8% in their forecast horizon to 2022. They say they therefore felt compelled to promote the exploration of unconventional avenues to boosting economic growth, improving business confidence, and attracting FDIs. This year, the bank facilitated a full day of forums following the delivery of the budget speech. Giving opening remarks at the evening session, CEO Stephen Bogatsu stressed that there needs to be a move away from talk to action.
If you go back a couple of years and look at all the speeches and all the expert advice that has been given to various sectors, we have not seen the operationalizing of the ideas that have been shared. And I challenge all of you to ensure that we assist government where we can, and ensuring that everything that will be discussed here will actually be implemented, so that next year we can have different discussions around the operationalization of the discussions that have been happening over this period.
Adding to the day's deliberations from members of the technology, energy, agriculture and other industries that had made their presentations during the day were Chief Economist at FirstRand, Dr. Tunes de Vet, Group Finance Director at Sefalana Holding Company Limited, Mohammed Osman, Market Strategist at First National Bank Botswana, Moatudi Sebabole, and Managing Tax Consultant at Opracon, Jonathan Hore. To begin, as is also done in the delivery of the national budget, Dr. de Vet further unpacks the expected performance of the global and regional economy.
The point that I just want to start with is that the budget that was read, the forecast that's being presented at the moment for Botswana from FirstRand's perspective, etc., is set against a backdrop, and I think this is important, where the global economy is in the strongest position for basically a decade. Okay. I would like to position this. I mean, if you look at what the global economy, the South African economy, what the Botswana economy has faced and had to deal with over the last 10 years, is a global financial crisis, a European sovereign debt crisis, an emerging market crisis led by a slowdown in China. And then the global economy started to lift last year, but we had our own issues in South Africa that spilled in the region. Okay? And we're now at the point where the global economy is actually experiencing synchronized above-trend growth. Okay? And that's the first time that I think, from a South African perspective, we can say, well, that's great, and I'm sure from a Botswana perspective too. If we look, another point that I would like to make, just before going into some of the fiscal history, is that a traditional cycle is re-emerging. Okay, with all these crises that the world had to deal with, it was difficult to forecast cycles. Okay, now it does seem as if a traditional cycle is re-emerging. Okay, that is a cycle where we've got strong growth that feeds into sentiment. Sentiment drives risk assets up. It supports financial markets. That creates easy financial conditions. You get increased investment spending, consumption spending, resource utilization increase. Eventually, inflation increases and central bank tightens rates and the economy slows. So right now, we believe we are at the point where the global economy is lifting, and we're now where resource utilization rates are increasing. Okay, it's a sweet spot. Okay, it's a sweet spot for governments to take opportunity of. Okay, I mean, listening to the discussions over the last few sessions. Okay, there's going to be funding. Okay, in an environment where sentiment is positive, where financial conditions is easy, there's going to be a search for yield and funding will increase. We should just be cognizant that the cycle turns. Okay, and that's the one risk that we highlight significantly to all our clients, etc. is be careful. We've got a normal cycle emerging. It's great at the moment. Use the opportunity, but be mindful of a cycle that will eventually turn. Okay, what's the role of fiscal policy? Okay, and I would like to cushion that or set that in the context of the last decade. Okay, what did we see over the last decade? Okay, I mean, and I'm sure you recall it. Okay, I can certainly recall it. The period early 2000s, 2003 up to 2007 was special. Okay, global boom, commodity boom, credit boom, and you can see how government fiscal balances actually reduced. Okay, this is developed market fiscal balances, and you can see there 2002, 2006, it actually global fiscal balances for developed markets nearly broke into positive territory. It was just below 2% of global GDP. Okay, and then the GFC hit. Okay, the GFC hit, and if it wasn't, and this is the first lesson from fiscal policy. Okay, if it wasn't for extreme fiscal policy measures, deficits moved from 2.2% to nearly 10% of GDP. Okay, if we look at countries, the US deficit moved to nearly 10%, UK deficit nearly moved to 10%. Botswana's deficit moved above 5%. South Africa's deficit moved above 5%. Fiscal policy cushioned the blow. Okay. If it wasn't for that, the world probably would have suffered a depression, not a great recession. Okay. So the debt, the fiscus, cushioned the blow. It's an important role for monetary policy, but it set up the next crisis. Important lesson. Okay, it's an important lesson that I would just like to highlight. It set up the European crisis, the European sovereign crisis, okay, with government debt spiking from 60% of GDP for DM all the way to close to 100%. We moved into a space where Europe couldn't fund itself anymore, okay, and that set us up for the next crisis that we had to deal with. Is then China's government stepped in, and EM government stepped in and cushioned the blow, okay. China did it through their corporate sector, okay, so China's corporate debt increased from 90% to about 145% of GDP.
This expected economic growth globally, regionally and domestically holds great potential for the development of the businesses that are needed to ease unemployment, reduce poverty and improve overall quality of life for Botswana. Up next, we hear how well positioned Botswana is for such developments from yet another seasoned panelist.
What is the future of help? It's to help people find the great in themselves. The drive, the passion. Help them find their true potential. Help them stretch. Help them grow. That's why we help people help themselves, help the world. Because a little help goes a long, long way. FNB, how can we help you?
Welcome back to First Issues as we continue to share the learnings from this year's FNB Budget Review Seminar. What can a company that began in Botswana as 6 wholesalers and a maize mill 43 years ago and is now a large conglomerate that operates in Zambia, Lesotho and Namibia as well, tell us regarding the enablers and deterrents to business that they have experienced in this country. What major learnings does Sefalana have with regards to doing business in Africa? Who better to give us an idea on the ease of doing business in Botswana other than the Group Finance Director at Sefalana, Mr. Mohammed Osman. He tells us how Botswana compares to other countries within the region and on the continent based on their vast experience.
We're present in Botswana, Namibia, Lesotho, and now South Africa, with a little bit of a presence in Zambia in terms of our property that we own there. But we evaluated Rwanda and Zimbabwe and decided against moving to those countries. So, as I said in my presentation this evening, we look at a number of factors. So macroeconomic factors is a critical thing for us, along with ability to start up businesses, the operational matters, repatriation of funds, etc. And on balance, I must say that Botswana rates quite highly up compared to the others. Yes, we've had a difficult economic environment for the last year and a half, but I think that's going to change. Things are going to be on the upturn. But we've got a lot of things going for ourselves. So in Botswana, we've got a low tax regime, 22%. That's a lot less than, for example, Namibia at 32%, South Africa at 28%. So from a tax perspective, we've got a good structure. Our manufacturing is at 15%. And generally, there's a lot of ease at which you can set up a business. There's no requirement for a local partner. The economy is fairly strong, supported by diamonds. The population at 2 million is relatively small in the world context, but if you compare it to the other countries that are named, it's very similar. Lesotho, Namibia, and Botswana all have 2 million people, but the macroeconomics are different. So from that perspective, I think we've got a lot going for ourselves. We've also got a lot of treaties with other countries, making tax efficiency one of the strong points for us. So we've got something called the IFSC accreditation, which means that we can repatriate funds from other parts of Africa through the tax treaty, which means we don't pay double tax along the way. So ultimately, more money for our shareholders in Botswana, and therefore I can pay my dividends more effectively.
From your exploits as Sefalana, what would you say have been the 3 major lessons you have learned doing business in various countries in Africa?
I think lesson number 1 is that you need to do a careful consideration of the market that you enter into. I mentioned that our most recent deal has been the one in South Africa. We took literally 18 months to get that bottomed out. We had cautionaries out for months and months and months. Investors were asking what's going on. But the reality of it was that we were making sure that whatever we do was for the best interest of shareholders. So we have always taken a cautious approach, and it's always worked for us. We took a cautious approach in terms of expanding out of Botswana, and Namibia was the first country that we did that. Again, we took a cautious approach, we got the right model, and we executed and we made a success of that. So learning your market is essential. Secondly, getting the right skill is critical as well. In all those regions that we operate in, the head of the business tends to be an expatriate, and that is purely because the skill set is there. 99% of the rest of the workforce is local. So in Namibia, I think 98% is local, only 2% is expat. In Botswana, less than 1% is expat, the rest is local. So we have to recognize that there is a place for expat skills, and there's a lot of learning that can be done across border. So that's probably lesson number 2. And lesson number 3 is really not to expand too fast, too quickly. We have entered into a few regions in the last 3-4 years. We are likely to only enter into one other region in the next year or 2. But after that, I think we're going to consolidate. We're going to make sure we're extracting as much value as possible from where we are operating in. And so far, that's worked well for us. If you compare us to our competitors, we tend to make a lot more money with a fewer number of stores. And that's the right model to progress. It's not about how big you are or how many stores you've got. It's about what's the bottom line and what can you give your shareholder.
It does look like you have found the winning formula, but have there been any major learning curves or many mistakes? Anything that you would have done differently as Sefalana, looking back?
Nothing comes to mind. I mean, the successes I can think of. I mean, I've been at Sefalana 6 years, and The big successes have to be the Namibian acquisition. So I don't think we'd have done anything differently there. We continue to expand. We've got 14 stores. We're looking to grow that to 20 stores to gain further value out of it. The other one was Lesotho. We've managed to turn that around very well, so that's worked out well. South African deal, we're imminent now, but we've already started generating income from there. So nothing comes to mind to say that we did anything wrong necessarily or that we do anything different. So the model seems to work, and we'll continue to use that model until such time where perhaps we need to change it.
The movement of money and products, reflected in the quality of customs, excise and tax systems in a country, is evidently a major consideration for investors and multinationals. With that in mind, we discuss the proposed developments in Botswana's tax regime for 2018 next.
What is the future of help? It's to help people find the great in themselves. The drive, the passion. Help them find their true potential. Help them stretch. Help them grow. That's why we help people help themselves, help the world. Because a little help goes a long, long way. FNB, how can we help you?
Welcome back to the show as we take a look at some of the issues raised by the 2018 National Budget Speech. Customs, excise and tax collectively are said to have made up the bulk of government revenues in 2017. Speaking on that important contributor to government coffers, that is tax, was managing tax consultant at Opracon, Jonathan Hore. He alerted us to some important changes with regards to Botswana's tax regulations that we should all anticipate for this year.
So in 2018, there are going to be a couple of changes that are going to happen on the tax arena. The first one is that in the Minister of Finance is currently working on amending the Income Tax Act so as to bring about a 5% corporate tax rate on those on businesses which operate in the SPED region. As you may know, the BCO closure resulted in a number of employees losing their jobs, and a lot of businesses were also affected by that closure. So in order to stimulate the economic growth in the SPED region, the ministry is actually working on a 5% corporate tax rate for the first 5 years of operation, and thereafter the companies will be taxed at 10%. So the SPED region, the areas that are covered include Salibi Pikwe, Bobonong, Maunatala, Lerala, and Madinare. So that is mainly going to be the advantage of then setting up a business in Pikwe.
How big a tax break is this are we talking about if we're talking 5%?
Yeah, it's the normal corporate tax rate is 22%, and then reducing it now to 5%, it means you're saving
more than
17%. But of course, the challenge is that the IMF and the OECD have always been cautioning economies and nations against reducing taxes. But in the case of Botswana, really, it's really necessary because a lot of people lost their jobs. So there is need for the economy in the SPED region to be revived. And in as much as, of course, these institutions are saying it is not ideal to do it, but if it is ideal for the nation, then it is good to go. I mean, it is good to go that route. So on the other, another issue is what is called multinational entities. So multinational entities are entities which operate in more than one country. So you may have a subsidiary in Botswana, and then you've got a holding company probably in South Africa or the USA. So there is a law which is coming which is called transfer pricing. Transfer pricing is legislation which ensures that prices of goods and services between and among these MNEs are at market rates. Why would you want to have those prices at market rates? It is with the intention that each country collects its fair share of revenue. Because without transfer pricing rules, what it means is the prices can be manipulated. But when the transfer pricing rules come, all these MNEs will be required to have documentation, and that documentation will actually stipulate how they arrived at the pricing of those services. One common example could be management services that are charged by an entity which is sitting or which is operating in South Africa. The question would be, how did they arrive at that level of the management fees? Without a transfer pricing legislation, what could then happen is the prices of those services could be manipulated and there will be too much, which means that companies in Botswana will end up paying less tax, and that affects the collections of government. So transfer pricing is coming, but it's been on the cards for quite some time. I think it's because it involves quite a lot in terms of training and also in terms of setting up systems, and it's also quite a costly exercise on the part of the tax authority as well. They have to invest a lot in data. So those are the major changes that are coming, and well, from a policy perspective, I would say the minister has already mentioned that there's going to be a review of what is called the IFSC incentive, whereby entities which are registered under the IFSC are taxed at 15%. So this review is actually meant to remove the tax haven tag that has been put on Botswana several times. It started in 2011, and then it came again in 2017. So
one you seem to think has been unfairly placed on Botswana.
Certainly, initially probably, well, somebody could say, yes, maybe we didn't have a lot of these exchange of information agreements. But then Botswana went on to sign a lot of these agreements, plus or minus 21, and amended double taxation agreements to be compliant with the set rules. And then last year, when all this had been done, all of a sudden, they just came again and say Botswana is not compliant. But fortunately, Botswana was not listed because it then argued its case. Our neighbor, Namibia, was listed. So that will affect, obviously, the flow of foreign direct investment.
That brings us to the end of our program. Do make sure to share your own review of the 2018 national budget with us on any of our social media platforms. With that, it is good night from me, Namizo Samakula, and the First Issues team.